They say you should never meet your heroes, but apparently in this case, if you do, then you'll not only get invited over for a big ol' cookout, but you'll also have all of your family and marital problems solved with a jam session. Woo! So that's why you should always go up to the voice actors of Dragon Ball at any convention you happen to be at and start unloading all of your problems onto poor Sean Shamel about how awesome Goku is and how your wife took the kids and how you don't know how to get them back. And serious note, if you do see Sean, then maybe thank him for voicing Lucario in Smash Bros. And his excellent audiobook work, as I'm sure he would appreciate some variety in what the fans talk to him about. But anyway, Willie Nelson and his magical marriage-saving braids. Talk about ruining the small-town vibe of the show right at the beginning, huh? We're not even past the 4th episode, and we are already needing to bring in celebrities playing themselves to make the show feel important. Ugh. And some people will even scratch their heads at why a guy like Hank would consider a dope-smoking liberal like Willie Nelson to be his hero, but I think the issue comes from the labels themselves. It is Willie's actions and attitude that people are drawn towards, and the romantic air of self-confidence and honky-tonk helpfulness. Nobody is gonna call Willie's efforts on behalf of Farm Aid a socialistic program that's made to prop up those failing farms that couldn't compete in the cutthroat capitalistic world. No, it's just good old people coming together to help families eat some good food and rock out. And him playing at bars during his youth, which was discouraged by his Methodist upbringing, that didn't earn him the title of a faithless hedonist. I mean, hell, Willie Nelson is technically a tax cheat if we want to be brutally honest here, and his home was auctioned off by the IRS. However, the Texas community loved him so much that nobody bid on his seized property, standing with Willie and even selling him back his home at a much lower price than what should have been the case. Wish that had happened to my foreclosed home. This is all to say that modern labels have really caused us to make a bunch of assumptions about each other, which may be what causes some folks to scratch their heads and wonder, like, why does Texas and Hank love Willie? Because these days, if a performer with Willie Nelson's background showed up in Texas, then he would likely be booed out of town on a rail if they tried to replicate the same feeling of being a cool, humble, and admirable guy. It works for Willie Nelson, but I don't think it could work now. I do like how the show is smart enough to realize this built-in contradiction between Hank and Willie's lifestyles, even if it doesn't do much with that revelation once the matter has been called to our attention.
He's had trouble with the IRS, and I must have spent 6 hours last April on that 1040 form. Easy my ass.
And yes, a little bit earlier, I did take the piss out of bringing Willie Nelson onto the show this early. I mean, even The Simpsons didn't start having celebrities play themselves until Tony Bennett made an appearance in season 2, but I do wonder how much of Willie's presence on King of the Hill did help to bolster the public's awareness and enjoyment of the show. Managing to snag such a big name on just the 4th episode must have been quite the boon. However, watching the Willie worship now, I do look at it in a more academic way, seeing it as a time capsule of a different era. There's definitely a distinct feeling that the show made room for Willie, you know? Although, if you're a big fan of country music, then this is likely a huge, like, wow moment for you, as seeing a character that you like or relate to enjoy someone or something that you also do, that can really add an extra sprinkling of fun and make you think more fondly of the shared experience that you're having. It's kind of like how David Kalaiki has a freaking 7 of 9 poster in his room. Ugh, I love that. It always makes me smile that he's got that little reference there, even if, yes, admittedly, he's probably just admiring her figure than he is reminiscing about Jerry Ryan's grade A performances.
7 downloaded my program into her cybernetic matrix. An interesting sensation, to say the least.
And now you're in control of Seven's body.
Total control, it seems.
Anyway, back to Willie Nelson. How silly of me to keep losing track of him in this conversation. I think this episode does some pretty good work even without all of the Willie stuff, such as the whole, like, I'm about to bust scene, and Bill's slow-ass swing on the golf course, or the whole general conversation around hero worship. Hank tasking his son with finding a hero, someone who inspires him to try new things and make more of his life, is a really engaging idea, but the whole, like, oh, you need to find a hero of your own and not just copy mine, is a point that gets pretty muddled when Hank's actual hero appears in the flesh. However, the end message of, like, oh, Hank is Bobby's real hero is the kind of tender and overtly like, aw shucks type of solution that I have really come to expect from season 1. Whatever flaws the season may have with its comedic soul, it does make up for with an honest heart. Although I don't know if the show necessarily had to choose one or the other. I think King of the Hill eventually found a way to intermingle its jokes with caring emotions, as we later see Dale screaming up at the Marfa lights, "You can't take him, he's my son!" And when we're talking about a show that has that high of a bar to meet, then I am inclined to grade these episodes on a curve. And that admittedly isn't very fair, and does sort of serve to punish the show for being good at what it does, but this is my little classroom, and if there's one thing that educators do better than anybody else on the planet, it is taking a sickening degree of pleasure at creating and enforcing harsh rules that make people miserable. There is no trip quite like a power trip, baby! But it is not just arbitrary cruelty that makes me regard this episode with such harsh eyes, as I just don't give a fucking squirrel fart about Peggy being jealous of Hank's guitar, or Hank fanboying over Willie and wanting to live in his skin. And of course, there's some really oddly shaped jokes in here too, like Bill and Dale staring at that girl pouring her drink for far too long with no real payoff, and the whole Rooster Boy bit and Bob Dylan talking to Boomhauer. Without a proper introduction to who those celebrities are, future audiences are gonna have to look up trivia on the show to get the joke, and I hate when I have to do that. By comparison, Peggy's Fanfare does a fantastic job of name-dropping all the country music stars that showed up and gave us a general vibe of their personality, so even if you aren't familiar with them, you can at least get a sense of what they're like, but this one is literally just saying, hey look, there's someone you should recognize, they don't really do much, but they're here, you get it? Get it? And yes, I know it's all supposed to be just a little bit of fan service for country music fans, but the way that they're presented just feels lazy and not very engaging. I would actually be so embarrassed if I was showing this episode to someone who was watching the show for the very first time. I would just be sitting there the whole time, just like sitting on my hands hoping, praying that they could look past all the dated references and just try to find something to enjoy, because I promise it's a good show, just ignore all that other stuff. The whole episode is just so bloodless and sitcom-y, where I feel like these exact same plot points could have been placed into any other show and been done exactly the same. There's just so little of King of the Hill's own identity seen in this, probably because they had to make all of this room for Willie. This is quite unlike the time that Peggy punched Randy Travis in his sniveling face, or Connie played Bluegrass and Branson, even though both of those episodes also had the King of the Hill cast meeting actual big-name celebrities. But you know what? At least Hank wasn't secretly related to Willie Nelson, thank God. That would have been such a blisteringly stupid idea that only a paint-huffing, stare into the sun and melt your brain moron would think that creating a direct familial link to one of the biggest country stars in the world would be an okay thing to do for our humble little workaday show and wouldn't create all kinds of enormous and unnecessary questions. Thank Johnny Cash's blessed middle finger that they were wise enough not to make such a stupid, vapid, uninspired, cheap, out-of-touch star fucker of a choice. Best to just smack Willie in the head with a golf club and be done with it.
Check his pockets for cigarettes.
This is one of those brutally difficult episodes to give a score because I'm just so indifferent to it. There's just nothing really for me to outright hate, and nothing that inspires me to rewatch the episode, except when I'm going through the whole series and this one just happens to be the next one on the list. I can at least understand the reasons why other people may enjoy it, but hey, it's my call to make and I only have access to my own brain, so I have to say that this is a complete miss for me. Even the dream sequence at the beginning is just sort of like okay. Actually, you know how in the episode Lucky's Wedding Suit, it has that deleted scene, you know the one where the guys talk about where the entire series took place over the course of a year and supposedly certain episodes were dreams? That may have been a really dumb idea that any first-year composition student might have tried in a misguided attempt to seem clever, but it does allow us to believe that, much like the dream sequence at the start, that this episode may have been just like another layer or version of Hank's tendency to dream about Willie Nelson. Therefore, I give this episode 2 dreams out of 10. I know that's probably a far more cruel score than some people would expect, as there are indeed a bunch of cute, smaller scenes peppered throughout. Luann's sub-story about doing braids is expertly threaded, get it, throughout the story, and does give her a wonderful payoff of doing Willie's hair. My main problem mostly just comes from how much I despise the Peggy side story, and how a genuinely interesting plot about Bobby's whole role model thing gets overtaken by all of this Willie worship. It's as though we were on a field trip to a fireworks factory, but then the majority of the story is just about Hugh Jackman being our bus driver. Like, what? And don't get me wrong, Hugh Jackman and Willie Nelson are both fine people and entertaining in their own rights, but if they aren't there to enhance a story, then their usage either needs to be modified or removed entirely. I think this is simply a case of the core concept of an episode being something that I just don't enjoy, as modifying Willie to be like playing a character on the show and not literally himself would require an entire rewrite of the whole story. Sometimes things are just a miss, even if you do your best to look at them objectively, and that's alright. Not everybody loves Xander from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for example, but god damn it, I love him. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta get out of here. I'm about to bust.
Let's roll. Come on, Bobby.